Hey, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. So glad you can join me today. So this is going to be part 2 of my series on the exploitation of George Floyd, where I will be sharing information that could possibly answer the question of why George Floyd's death was chosen and what the timing of it has to do with the reason why he was chosen. So knowing the stats I touched on in Part 1, it is clear that George Floyd was chosen for a reason. So in short, George Floyd's situation was an easy card to play to reinstill the evaporating fear from the coronavirus and really distract from what was really happening in America over the past 2 weeks. So let's go deeper. Let's ask these two questions. Why George Floyd and why now? So why George Floyd? The really simple answer to this, from what I found, is his situation checked a lot of the boxes that were necessary for this to be used as an incident that will induce a lot of public outrage from widespread groups of people, especially people who have already been following the police brutality narrative, and especially coming off of a time when people are already struggling and more emotionally sensitive, which I'll talk about in a few seconds. So he checked the box of a black man being killed by a white cop as he was unarmed. There was video, quote unquote, proof of this happening, which I'm not going to get into a lot of the discrepancies that have actually been coming out regarding the situation. There's gaps in the video surveillance that's available. There's some questions on the timing of the video that's been shown widely. Going forward in this video, I'm assuming everything we've seen so far is the truth regarding when he was killed, how he was killed, who he was killed by, and where, and kind of all that stuff. So I'm just going to assume that all that stuff is correct up until now. So while of course we need to remember George Floyd and really all the people who were killed by police brutality, the important question to ask is, why do we only hear from about a handful of these people when from my first video we see that 3 people every single day on average are killed from police brutality? So here's why I believe that we are hearing about George Floyd more than really any other black man's death at the hands of police in recent history. So there are a sequence of events that have really bookended George Floyd's death that are really telling of why he was chosen. So first, let's talk about some things that happened leading up to his death and the media coverage of it. So first, I found a Reddit post that pointed out that this happened 3 days after Joe Biden's gaffe about his comment on, quote unquote, "you ain't black," regarding if you don't vote for him, then you're not black, which may have prompted the establishment and the people who were backing Joe Biden to shift the narrative and shift the attention away from him, because he was getting panned on all sides of the equation for that comment, and they needed to really take back control of the narrative of their candidate, who it appears that they are just going with and they're not going to replace him. They just need to go all in with him. And I have my suspicions on why they're doing that. Clearly he is mentally challenged and there's some things going on there. It could be due to his age, and I think what's happening is they're kind of using him as the prop, as the puppet, and they are going to place a VP candidate with him, and assuming whatever happens to him, or maybe he'll just be kind of up there and the VP will actually be running the show. It's clear that they are really trying to find or narrow down their picks to a female woman of color as the VP pick, which I'm not saying I want anything to happen to Joe Biden, but let's say his age gets the best of him and he does not survive long enough, assuming they win. That is their way to get their woman president, since that didn't happen the first time, and it's pretty clear that they're a little too far in to replace him with someone like that. So that seems to be their plan, from my opinion. Could all be speculation. I could be giving them way too much credit, but that's what I think is really happening here. A couple other things that happened that didn't gain traction, which is maybe why they needed to up their game as far as what they choose to exploit, was the incident with George Floyd was 4 days after a black guy was arrested for beating up people in a nursing home. And also this was around the time when the Ahmaud Arbery story in Georgia had kind of been buried in the news. So those were some of the events regarding race relations and police brutality leading up to George Floyd's death that you could say failed in the public's eye as far as gaining traction and inducing outrage in the public. An interesting part of this is the timing around when George Floyd's death happened to be the same week that a lot of states were opening up, a lot more businesses were opening up, and the loosening of coronavirus restrictions was done pretty reluctantly and really as the result of a lot of pressure being put on the leaders of states who were reluctant to reopen, which could have contributed to them really trying to exploit this situation because it would have been their next move to scare people and inflicting fear in the public, which is a great way to control them. What we found was these leaders were losing control as people started defying these stay-at-home orders, and we all know now pretty clearly that the coronavirus response was used as a cover to push the vote by mail initiative that was one of the two ways, besides hurting the economy, which was covered also in the coronavirus response, to really cheat the election. And it seems to be they know that the only way they're going to beat Trump is if they cheat in the election or they completely dismantle the economy, because that is proven to be the way to hurt an incumbent. So they needed a plan B to force businesses to close, to create fear amongst people to stay home so they don't spend money, and then also is providing proof or giving them a reason to reintroduce their fear of a second wave of the virus, but also start to push to destroy the system of law and order in the country, which is needed in order to basically overthrow the government, which is really about to expose all their corruption if Trump gets reelected or has a really strong chance, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I want to mention a few more things. And here's why this situation, when it checked all the boxes that I talked about earlier, was a lot more effective now. It's because, think about it, people were more at home than normal. Unemployment rates were literally skyrocketed. If you look up the graph on like unemployment rates, it just goes like off the charts the past few months. Businesses were forced to close, and when you fan those flames and people's emotions are already higher, they're more sensitive to things going on in the world because everything's a little more unstable, they're able to exacerbate the problem, and the outrage is a lot more than in normal situations. Whereas a year ago, people were doing a lot better, and there wasn't a pandemic that just happened that was responded to in a very, very severe, all-encompassing way. Those people orchestrating or benefiting from exploiting the situation, the results of it were better than they could even imagine. And just like the beginning stages of the coronavirus response, where before we even had a chance to learn about what was really happening, it was easy to get people to be fearful and follow orders, but now we know they actually didn't care about the issue of the virus itself. It was just a way to hurt Trump, which is what they've been doing basically, honestly, knowing what we know now since before he was even elected, as basically insurance policies, which we'll cover at the end as well regarding the corruption. So to summarize this first part of the video regarding why George Floyd was chosen and more specifically why the timing of his death was important, is the goal all along by people who are opposing Trump and people who are backing, hopefully, the candidate who will prevent Trump from getting a second term. Their goal has basically been to inflict fear through economic disaster and trying to continue any fear tactics they could, because their initial fear tactic of coronavirus was shortened due to pressure to reopen, and their vote by mail initiative was falling through because that's their way to cheat and get him out. They found it as the perfect time to not only exploit and create more fear, but also to distract from a lot of the investigations that were happening and a lot of things happening in courts the last 2 weeks that were poised or will be poised to expose a lot and almost all the corruption that would be disastrous for their side, for the anti-Trump crowd, trying to cover up the network of corruption that they're part of. This could be yet another reason on top of what we already talked about, and I actually think maybe one of the best reasons and more plausible reasons for a shift in news focus from coronavirus temporarily. Not only was their coronavirus starting to be exposed for what it really was, which was an over response, and people were starting to not really listen. They needed something to draw people back and stoke more fear, right? So the corruption of the deep state, if you will, was being hit the past few weeks, and for a while now, but really seriously the past few weeks, from multiple sides. So one part of it is the Obama administration that was intact at the end of his term, and the Trump campaign that was transitioning into the Trump administration. It appears that the Obama administration was spying on the transition team and even spying on Trump's campaign before he was elected as kind of an insurance policy, like I mentioned before. And that was one part of it that was in the courts this past 2 weeks. Then we have the Hillary Clinton emails and the floodgate that could open if she is forced to be deposed. And there was also a hearing regarding voter fraud on Capitol Hill. So in the courts and on Capitol Hill, all these dynamics were playing out the last 2 weeks that are the catalysts and basically the first steps in completely opening the floodgates to exposing all the corruption, draining the swamp, if you will. So in regards to the Obama administration, which is the scandal is being called Obamagate, like Watergate with Obama. So the Senate Homeland Security Committee issued subpoenas to nearly 36 officials regarding the unmasking of General Flynn, who was spied on as an incoming intelligence official. And this is kind of taking care of the international part of the investigation, whereas the Senate Judiciary Committee this past week, a few days ago, actually voted to give their chair, Lindsey Graham, who we have questions about, but that's okay, kind of unbridled power to subpoena in the investigation as well, which seems to be taking care of the domestic part of the investigation. Speaking of Michael Flynn, his lawyers have been pushing to get his case dropped in a similar way to the way Hillary is trying to get her motion to get deposed dropped as well. And it's very interesting to see these two cases, very similar as far as high-ranking intelligence officials trying to drop both of their cases, but we know probably one is on the good side and one is not, from what we've seen so far. So Hillary's latest email trouble or email bring up of her or whatever is the result of Judicial Watch, who is a conservative judiciary watchdog group, wanting more looks into the emails because it appears we haven't seen everything from them yet, and they could be even more damning than what we've seen so far. From what I've seen and heard, the emails we haven't even seen yet are the worst yet. And I don't think it's ironic that I stumbled across a video and Michael Flynn's lawyer is giving a speech and saying that people's reactions who have seen the emails that haven't been public or been exposed or investigated yet allegedly have been sick to their stomach and had to walk away and throw up because it's so bad what they contain in them. So if that's true, I mean, that may be a really good reason why they don't want people to know about this, right? So speaking of Judicial Watch, they also had a hearing on the right to vote on Capitol Hill this week, or this past week, I should say, where someone on the panel, or on whatever you want to call it, also testifying was Stacey Abrams, who, if you don't know who she is, she's actually recently been slighted by Joe Biden amid speculation that she was his top vice presidential pick. So, and she has kind of been the left's face of voter fraud ever since she lost her bid as governor of Georgia. And so she actually faced off against Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton, who has actually won lawsuits on voter fraud in many states, including the most populous state, which is the state I actually live in, of California. So he has a very strong track record on exposing voter fraud across the country, and Stacey Abrams doesn't really have much success with that. She still is a loser as far as her campaign went, and has clearly been on a campaign as the left's voter fraud face. So I thought that was very interesting. And as we know, they're using the coronavirus and the stay-at-home orders as reason to push the vote by mail, which we know is really susceptible to voter fraud, and it's kind of the reason why they're pushing it, so they can cheat the election. And if you haven't gotten the hint already, you're probably thinking, well, if Stacey Abrams is pushing for vote reform or the right to vote or whatever, but they're also pushing something that's more voter fraud, how are they getting away with it? If you haven't gotten the message by now, or if you haven't seen the pattern by now, Everything they are accusing, I'm talking about the left and Democrats in general, at least the powerful ones, everything they are accusing other people of doing are the things they are doing themselves. They are completely the masters of deflection and saying, oh, look over here, when they are the ones that are in the center of the most scandalous, most corruption of anybody in the political realm. That is what you are seeing, and I know some people don't want to see it or don't want to believe it, but that is what is happening, and we're going to probably see most of it exposed pretty soon. So depending on how these investigations turn out, we could see the floodgates open on quote-unquote draining the swamp. Or we could see the complete breakdown of law and order in the country. Now, these main points that I've mentioned here are the ones that really will determine where the country goes after 2020. And there are two sides right now fighting it out at the expense of really regular Americans, and we'll just have to see which side is going to win. So either the corrupt side that's trying to destroy the country from within, or the side trying to take down the side trying to destroy the country from within. So I want to thank you so much for watching part 1 and part 2 of my series on the exploitation of George Floyd, where in part 1 I laid the groundwork as far as why the situation is even exploitable, and in part 2, which is this part, I talked about why George Floyd in particular was chosen as the incident to use as a cover-up / distraction. Now in part 3, I will be highlighting / exposing these groups, quote unquote, doing the work, if you will, to carry out this distraction on behalf of the powerful needing the cover up. And these are celebrities, these are influencers, these are athletes, these are activist groups that are clearly using this as a political opportunity and are most likely in cahoots with all these powerful people that want the cover or want the distraction. And it even covers all the way to everyday people who are actually mimicking what these celebrities, influencers, athletes, political activist groups are doing and being used basically to really carry out the mission even further, that they may not realize is the product of social engineering, that they are playing right into the hands of the powerful that are using them to cover up their own corruption and their own wrongdoings. And I just think it's interesting how easily people are being played in this situation. So with that said, before you head out of this video, make sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on post notifications by ringing the bell. That way you get notified every time I post a video. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up as you head down to the comments and let me know what you think of whatever I've talked about today. I know this isn't really being talked about too much in the media, and most of the people who are even going this route are being really criticized and being bashed pretty hard. So I want to know what you think. So let me know, and I will talk to you in the next video. Bye-bye.